Hello and welcome to those of you who've just recently joined. I would now like to introduce today's presenter, Simon Barrowcliff. He is a chartered electrical engineer with over 35 years of experience in product testing, assessment and certification. Simon's current role is Senior Technical Specialist for the Certification and Global Market Access Business within the Connected Technologies Group in Element EMEA. He supports the Element IECEE and IECEX certification bodies and testing laboratories, UK approved bodies and EU notified bodies. He is also an active member of several BSI conformity assessment committees and is chair of BSI conformity assessment committees L6 and L61. If you would like to ask a question during the webinar, please select the questions pane in the toolbar to the right-hand side of your screen. Enter your question in the text, then press enter. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And if you do have any connection troubles, please refresh your browser or re-enter the GoToWebinar platform. I hope you all enjoy the webinar. Over to you, Simon.
Right, thank you, Tremaine. Welcome everybody to this webinar on UKCA. I'm going to just kill my camera for the moment just to improve a bit of bandwidth, and then we'll start. Let's do that. Okay, right. All right, the agenda for today. Originally, when we put this presentation together, it was to talk about the imminent changes that were due to occur as of the 1st of January 2023. And then subsequent to sort of getting this set up, and now BEIS and various government departments have released changes to that schedule. So this presentation is sort of a combination of the two. It's going to sort of try and bring us up to date as to where we are as of today, and will take into account what we call the easement changes that were announced in June, and then the overview of what the government guidelines are as of November of this year. So there's a rough agenda. So I'll go through the outline of the regime. I'll look at the guidelines. We'll look at some UK marking and importer details. We'll talk about spares and repairs, how this affects UKCA conformity assessment and EU notified bodies. We'll do a quick summary of the UK implementation. And then I'm going to do a case study using the Radio Equipment Regulations / Radio Equipment Directive, just as a way of illustrating the changes and how they might apply to you. So without further ado, let me go on to the first bit. So this is new. The new UKCA regulations have been drafted. They are available on UK government websites. You can go and review on their legislation pages. You can go and download this if you so wish. It hasn't come into force yet. It still needs to go through Parliament, but it is the fully fledged drafted document. If you could read the small print on this, it does say coming into force on the 31st of December 2022. So this particular document covers all of the changes that will impact upon us as from the beginning of next year, and is fully up to date in that respect. And the purpose of all of these amending regulations is trying to take us from the CE regime that the UK was in prior to January 2021 and move us towards the UKCA system that's been effective since that date, but is not fully implemented. So at the moment we're in a transitional period where CE and UKCA are accepted. When you look at UKCA, you look at the intent of it. It was designed to be a fairly simple mirror of the current CE regulations, so that technically there should be no changes which are going to impact manufacturers too much. But there are administrative changes to marking on the product, to documentation supplied with the product, to importers, to the declaration of conformity, where you now need a UK declaration of conformity for the GB market. There are differences in the way you are represented within the GB market, and of course there's the difference between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in terms of how these regulations are in force. But I think all along it's worth remembering that if it's something you did for CE, then largely that is what you will do for UKCA. There are few deviations practically from one to the other, apart from these administrative aspects. So if you find yourself doing something for UKCA that seems strange and isn't what you would have done for CE, it's worth double checking and asking yourself the question, because it should be more or less the same. So let's have a quick look at the UKCA and CE regimes. So the easy bit, I suppose, is that we have CE marking, which we used to be, as the whole of the UK, involved with. And since the 1st of January 2021, we now have UKCA that impacts Great Britain. So Great Britain, England, Wales and Scotland all follow UKCA marking as their prime conformity assessment set of rules. In Northern Ireland, because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, Northern Ireland still follows CE marking rules like the EU 27 countries. The only slight difference for that is that if a product is third-party certified in the GB market under UKCA rules by a UK approved body, then that body can authorize a CE mark just for Northern Ireland by adding the UKNI logo immediately after the CE mark. So hence we have CE for Europe, CE in Northern Ireland where a third-party approved body isn't involved, or CE UKNI if a UK approved body has done the conformity assessment for Northern Ireland. And then in the UK, in GB, you have the UKCA mark applying. So I'm going to talk to you today about the general rules applying to most of the products under the authority of UK Government Department BEIS, which is Business, Energy, Industry Department. And these are related principally to CE marking under EU product directives such as EMC, low voltage, radio equipment, ATEX, and machinery. And we do need to note that different rules apply for other UKCA regulations, because all of the EU directives and regulations are now being transposed or have been transposed into UKCA equivalents. So two key ones that we get asked about a lot are the medical devices regulations. Now these aren't covered by the same rules I'm going to talk about today. So if it's medical devices, then I'm not going to be much help with you really, but the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency has produced its own guidance on the regulation. You can go and go onto the government websites and see that. But in principle, in terms of the relaxations for medical devices, the UK CE mark crossover period, which should have ended at the end of this year, has been extended to the 30th of June 2024. So not quite the same extension as we're getting for the BEIS governed regulations, but certainly 18 months going to 2024. But go and consult the regulation for details. The second one we get asked about a lot is the construction product regulations, and these are looked after by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. They too have produced guidance. It's available on the Gov UK website. Go and have a look at that. And now for CPR, whilst there are slightly different rules, the UKCA CE mark crossover period, so the transition period that we're in at the moment, has also been extended to the end of December 2024. But go and have a look at those the specific rules there, because the CPR has different ways of doing things to these other regulations and directives. But principally, I'm going to talk to you today about the regulations covered by BEIS, rather than CPR and medical devices, and noting there are other regulations for railways, cosmetics, explosives. So for each of your individual directives or regulations, go and have a look on the gov.uk website. It is very good. It's got lots of information in it that will give you the specific details for those directives and regulations. For the BEIS regulations, we're supposed to change on the 1st of January next year to make UKCA mandatory within the GB market. The November changes and what's in the new legislation now adds a 2-year delay to that. So the 1st of January 2023 has now been moved to the 1st of January 2025. And that means that you can continue to use CE marking as evidence of conformity assessment for the GB market and the Northern Ireland market for another 2 years. So that's the good news from there. 2 more years, and then before you have to switch over to UKCA. There's also some relaxations after the 1st of January 2025. So again, a further relaxation to ease people into the market. And this is to allow UK marking and importer details to be placed on the product via a sticky label or on an accompanying document until the 31st of December 2027. So you've got another 2 years where you have to use the UKCA marking rules, where you have to put UK GBC importer details on your product, but you have the option to put those on for another 2 years. The second easement is the continued acceptance of spares into the GB market to repair, replace and maintain products to the same conformity requirements as they were originally in place when they first put on the market. There's a clarification, there's no need to retest and remark existing imported stock that has been CE marked and has been brought into the UK before the 31st of December 2024. And there's a further relaxation in terms of reduced retesting costs by allowing some third-party certificates provided by EU notified bodies to be used in support of UKCA marking after the 1st of January 2025 until the 31st of December 2027. So those are the sort of five changes that we're looking at. But we just look at the UK marking and importer details in a bit more detail. The rules, the regulations, as when they come into force on the 1st of January 2025 mandatorily, but are in force now. So you can see UKCA mark from today. You just don't have to do it now until the 1st of January 2025. But the regulations state that the UKCA marking and importer details must be permanently fixed to the product. However, the relaxation that's been provided will allow manufacturers to, as an alternative to permanently fixing it, to apply the UKCA marking on a sticky label to the product or within an accompanying document until the 31st of December 2027. Similarly, the importer details can alternatively be fixed onto the product by a sticky label or be included in an accompanying document until the 31st of December 2027. If you opt for the accompanying document, then that accompanying document must be such that it stays with the goods until they reach its end user. So normally that would mean something that's in the final packaging that's provided to the end user and not just something that's stamped on the outer box, which is shipping lots of product. So instruction sets or an addendum to the instructions, I suppose, is what they're thinking of here. But that's an important caveat. If you do go for this relaxation, you must make sure that the accompanying documents remain with the product until the end user sort of has access to the product. Spares and replacement parts, and this is allowing the use of spare parts for products that are already in the UK as of the 31st December 2024 and were CE marked prior to that date, to allow you to continue to provide spare parts for those products under the regulations that were in force as of the end of December 2024. So in other words, CE mark spare parts for those specific products are permitted to be used. Businesses should note that you're going to need to have documentary evidence to demonstrate that this is a spare part for a product that was imported or CE marked prior to the 31st of December 2024. So there is some work to do here if you're a business and want to take advantage of this spare parts easement or relaxation. You do need to put a document system in place to enable you to show where these, what will be then after the 1st of January 2025, be non-UKCA marked parts, why they are acceptable for use in the GB market. Next relaxation is for the use of existing EU notified body certification. So this is where a third-party UK approved body is required by the original UKCA regime. So directives like the low voltage directive don't have any notified bodies in it. The UK electrical equipment regulations don't have approved bodies. So there's no third party involved. But for things like EMC and radio equipment, machinery directive, ATEX directive, and their associated regulations, there is notified body involvement, either in factory production control or of testing of the product. And in those situations, the notified body for the EU is replaced by a UK approved body before you can apply the UKCA mark. However, the easement until the end of 2027 is that certificates issued to equivalent EU directives by an EU notified body and issued before the end of 2024 can now be used as the basis for UKCA marking certification without the intervention of a UK approved body until the end of 2027. So in other words, for the 2 years from the 1st of January 2025 to the end of 2027, if you have a current EU notified body certificate, you can apply the UKCA mark, but you do not need to involve a UK approved body until the end of 2027. Now that's subject to a caveat that you must undergo conformity assessment with a UK approved body at the expiry of the product or factory certificate, or after 3 years, which is the sooner. So if you have a certificate with an expiry date, so something like a factory assessment, you can use that if it was issued by an EU notified body until its expiry date, but as soon as it needs to be renewed, you need to involve a UK approved body at that point after the 1st of January 2025. Similarly, if you have a product certificate that's valid up to the end of 2024, you can use that in support of UKCA marking until the end of 2027, until that certificate is varied or changed. As soon as a change takes place, you cannot use an EU body to do that change. You have to use a UK approved body for that purposes. Which basically means that if you're using this relaxation to use these notified body certificates, they're good to go until those documents change or are amended or are reissued, in which case you need to involve a UK approved body. So a useful relaxation, but you do need to be careful that you keep ahead of where you are to make sure you do start using an approved body as soon as you do anything significant to the product. So the relaxation is helping you if the product isn't subject to change, basically. So let's have a look at some case studies very briefly for radio equipment. Noting that what I'm going to talk about here is very radio equipment directive, radio equipment regulation specific. There is no notified body for or approved body for the low voltage directive, for example. So where I'm talking about approved bodies and notified bodies here, that wouldn't apply. For EMC regulations, EMC directive, similar rules. So what I'm going to talk about here would have similar relevance. For the ATEX directive and the machinery directive, it's possibly a little bit more complicated than what I'm describing here, but the principles hold true. So it's worth going through on radio equipment, and then you can it'll at least give you some worked examples of where you would go from here. So let's have a think first about a piece of radio equipment solely for use on the UK market, for the GB market, with that's to be certified after the 1st of January 2025. So it's going to be formally in the UKCA regime. You can't use CE marking for that because it's going to be certified after UKCA becomes mandatory on the 1st of January 2025. So it's a new piece of equipment with a radio frequency, using frequencies only to be used in the UK. If it's to be sold just in the GB market, so that's the UK minus Northern Ireland, then just UKCA applies. And if UK designated standards have been used to assess the product, then the manufacturer applies the UKCA mark without the intervention of a UK approved body, and then you mark according to this. And that would be the same if you were doing low voltage directive or EMC directive, where you were using harmonized standards. You just go straight through UKCA, and that's good for the GB market. If you haven't used designated standards, then for radio equipment and also for EMC, then you would normally be required to use a UK approved body. But if the product's been certified for use in the UK prior to the 31st of December 2024, then you have the option not to involve that UK approved body until the 31st of December 2027, subject to the certification not changing. So in this case, you would then add the UK approved body's number and details on the UK Declaration of Conformity, or if you've continued to use an EU notified body, their details would need to go on the UK Declaration of Conformity. So you still need to fill a UK Declaration of Conformity in. You still need to apply a UKCA mark, but the conformity assessment, where you've used a notified body or approved body, would go on the Declaration of Conformity. So let's extend that a bit further. If we now say the product is now to be sold across the whole of the UK market, so GB plus Northern Ireland, then UK and CA and CE marking both apply. If UK designated standards and EU harmonized standards and frequencies have been used to assess the product, then the manufacturer goes ahead, applies the UKCA and CE marks without the intervention of a UK approved body or an EU notified body, and in which case the marking is this. So UKCA and the CE marking for to allow you to sell into the Northern Ireland market. Now, there is a bit of a caveat here for radio equipment, because if the product is only suitable for UK frequencies, then you would need to put some caveats, markings on the products or in the documentation. So you would then need to put a marking on the product to show that the product cannot be used in all the other EU or EEA countries. So it's a CE mark that you're applying just for Northern Ireland, and therefore you need to mark on the product in the documentation that it's not suitable for use elsewhere in the EU, because it's only suitable for frequencies in the UK market. If there's any restrictions for Northern Ireland, then you'd also need to put in this list of restricted countries the UKNI identification as well. So it gets a bit complicated under that scenario. So if UK designated and harmonized standards have not been used, then a UK approved body and an EU notified body should be involved. And if it's been certified in the EU prior to the 31st of December 2024, then the UK approved body could be optional until the end of 2027. In which case, you'd include details of the approved body or the EU notified body on the declaration of conformity. If you use an EU notified body for the Northern Ireland aspect, then it's simply a UKCA and a CE mark, straightforward. If, on the other hand, you've used a UK approved body to cover you for the Northern Ireland aspect, then the CE mark is followed by the UKNI mark to indicate that the CE mark is only valid in Northern Ireland and a UK approved body has performed the conformity assessment. So the UKNI mark does add a bit of complexity to this, and you just need to sort of work it through as you consider applying it. But because it's only an approved body, a UK approved body can authorize the use of a UKNI mark. Unless you are using a UK approved body for the Northern Ireland market, then you don't need to worry about UKNI. It will be CE marking that you would be using for that market. And if we now decide that this product uses frequencies that permit it to be sold across the whole of the UK and EU market, then the UKCA mark applies for the GB and CE mark for Northern Ireland and the EU. And this is effectively the same as case study 2, albeit that may need to be different restrictions on the product in some cases. If UK designated standards and harmonised standards have not been used, then an UK approved body and an EU notified body should be involved, and you may or may not apply the UKNI marking depending on what process you followed. But if you were going to sell this across the whole of the EU, then really it would be UKCA and the CE mark underwritten by a EU type examination certificate from an EU notified body. So it's quite complicated, I think, when you with radio equipment and where you are selling into Northern Ireland because of the UKNI mark. But if you work it through, I think you'll find that it's more straightforward than you think. So just some final thoughts really on this whole UKCA CA process and the extensions. In discussions on this, there's been some questions, and one of the discussions that I've had a few times is the extension of 2 years going to effectively create a 2-tier compliance system? Those that have chosen to wait to apply UKCA and those that haven't, have actually done it so far. And lots of manufacturers have been really good and have already gone through the process of UKCA or are going through it at this moment in time. So if you choose to wait as a manufacturer, what does that delay applying UKCA say about your product and your conformity assessment? Does the product compliance look out of date because it hasn't explicitly stated UKCA? And the question rises that because the technical requirements are the same and it's only an administrative function and largely self-declaration, and certainly if you apply the easement rules in terms of how you mark the product, where you put the importer details, is there any real penalty in actually using UKCA now and following the self-declaration route? I understand if you're using a notified body or approved body where it complicates it, but you are going to have to get this done by the end of 2027 anyway. So it's something to ponder in terms of if the UKCA mark is prevalent, which it is present on many, many products now, if you choose not to apply it, is that going to make your product look slightly out of date? And second, and this was a pre-webinar question, and thank you to the person who presented this for us. It said, given the multiple extensions to UKCA implementation, and we are, I think, on the 3rd at least, do the industry think this is leading to a long-term permanent acceptance of CE marking in the UK? So I think the point would make is that UKCA is scheduled to be fully enforced by the 31st December 2027. Yes, it has slipped in terms of its start date, but the end date for full enforcement, even under the rules they announced in June, was going to be to the end of 2027. So it is here, it is being used. I think it would be improbable for it cease to be used. But certainly BEIS, when they did one of their recent presentations on these latest changes, did note that the Office for Product Safety and Standards were reviewing safety strategy in the UK market at the moment. So I think it's a case of watch this space. Expect UKCA to replace CE. I think that is definitely going to happen. But we do need to watch out for further government updates as policy evolves. Bearing in mind, we were told one thing in June, and by November we've had another extension. So I think you do need to keep an eye on it. But I think those people who are hoping that perhaps UKCA will completely die a death, I think that's probably unlikely as a personal opinion. But certainly, we can expect perhaps some more things for us to do, some more changes before we get to the final deadline at the end of 2027. So at that point, I've sort of gone through what I needed to go through, and we'll go to question and answer.
Thank you, Simon, for such an informative presentation. We will now go through some questions. The first question that I have here is, our products are made in England and have been sold throughout the UK, including Northern Ireland, since 2016. Their present labels have CE marking on them. Do they need to add the NICA mark onto their labels with the CE mark when they are sending their products to clients in Northern Ireland from January 1st, 2023 or 2025?
Right, the answer is the UKNI mark is only authorised by a UK approved body. It isn't a manufacturer's self-declaration mark. So if you are self-declaring for CE marking at the moment, then you will self-declare for UKCA, and that self-declaration for CE will be good for Northern Ireland. So it's only if you're using a UK approved body to third-party comply your product would UKNI marking come into place. So for the vast majority of people, UKNI is not a thing. It would just be straightforward CE marking for the Northern Ireland market.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have, if NI isn't included, might the UKCA mark become GBCA at some point?
Political question, I suspect. At the moment, the UKCA mark is covering the GB marketplace because that's where the GB legislation applies. Because of the Northern Ireland Protocol as it stands at the moment, Northern Ireland's conformity assessment regulations are tied to the EU and CE marking rules. But it's still the mark of the United Kingdom. The UKCA mark is still the mark for the United Kingdom. It's just that it doesn't take precedence in Northern Ireland. So I can't see them changing the mark. I think they had enough difficulty choosing the mark in the first place. So no.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, what are the importer requirements for goods coming from outside the EEA?
There's a bit of confusion here. When the easement regulations came out, they required you to put the importer details on the product immediately from the 1st of January, what we know, 2025. It seems now under the new regulations that importer details for the GB market can now be put on a separate label or on the documentation until the end of 2027. But you need to specify an importer. If you're selling into the GB market, then somebody in the GB market needs to take responsibility for your product. And if it's not you as the manufacturer, then you do need to put in the details of your importer, the person who's taking responsibility for the UKCA technical file, either on the product or using the relaxations in your on a sticky label or in the technical documentation.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, what happens after 2027 regarding importer details?
Importer details need to be on the product, and it's that permanent marking. So permanent UKCA mark, permanent importer details on the product from the 1st of January 2028.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question I have is regarding, does the easement include having a UKCA declaration and the requirement to have the UKCA mark on instruction leaflets and the printing of the UK representative?
If you are going to UKCA mark your product, you need to have the details of the UKCA mark and importer details, etc., somewhere, either on the product or in the instruction set. So that's from the 1st of January 2025. So this recent change in November says instead of the 1st of January next year, you've got another 2 years where you don't actually need to apply the UKCA mark at all. After the end of 2024, you have to apply the UKCA mark, but you can put the details on a label or in instructions with the product rather than on the product itself. As soon as you apply the UKCA mark, whether on the product or on a label or in the instructions, you must fill out a UKCA declaration of conformity. The two things go together. The declaration of conformity underpins the mark, so you can't mark without filling a UK declaration of conformity out. So, and it equally applies whether you're actually physically marking the product or whether you're taking the easement route and putting it on a label or in accompanying documentation.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is from a company based in Northern Ireland, and their product has been tested by Element for EMC in Great Britain, and now they're aiming to put their product to sell in CE and UK markets. So do they need to have both CE and UKCA marks on their label, or will just one be fine? And how can they apply the UK NI mark to their product due to the fact they are based in Northern Ireland?
Right. So at the moment, until they can choose to apply the UKCA mark or not, until the end of 2024. So they needn't do anything at the moment. They can use the CE mark, and that will be valid in GB, Northern Ireland, and the rest of the EU. After the 1st of January 2025, then they will need to UKCA mark for the GB market. The CE mark is still valid for the Northern Ireland market at that stage. If they haven't used an approved body for their CE marking, then they don't need to, and then you don't need to apply the UK the NI mark for Northern Ireland. UK NI is only if an approved body gives you permission to apply it. So if you're not using a UK approved body for your UKCA mark, then you don't need to touch UK NI. You just use the CE mark because you're in that part of the CE regime.
Thank you, Simon. The next question I have is from someone saying that they service their products for up to 10 years. Would importing and exporting already sold equipment which is CE marked be covered by any of the spare part regulations?
I don't know the answer to that. The parts to go in it, which are the spare parts, but a piece of whole equipment. I suppose the CE marking rules don't apply to second-hand equipment that are already in the market. So therefore, UKCA rules wouldn't apply to second-hand equipment already in the market. But if you were changing markets, if you were moving from outside of GB into GB, you'd need to apply UKCA rules because that was the first time the product was placed on that market. If, on the other hand, it was already in the GB market and was just refurbished and resold, then the new rules don't apply.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, if somebody uses the approved body, how do they self-certify using UKAS equipment with evidence tests for EMC?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question there, but entirely. If they've had testing done in the UK, that's and it's UKAS accredited testing, then that's perfectly acceptable for use for CE marking for the EU, for Northern Ireland, or for the GB market. That doesn't change with these rules. If they've used a UK approved body to issue an EU type examination certificate for EMC, then that certificate is only valid if it's a UKCA certificate in the GB market, and you would need a separate EU type examination certificate to cover you for Northern Ireland and the rest of the EU. But that would only be if you have actually got an EU type, a very specific EU type examination certificate. Using someone like Element, who is an approved body stroke notified body, we can be acting in our role as a test lab, or we produce you with a test report, in which case that's good anywhere. We can also act as an approved body or notified body, in which case slightly different things would apply. But under that circumstance, if the person's unsure, is come back and ask us as to exactly what they've got and what they need to do. We're quite happy to answer questions from customers on how they can use what they are. But the whole approved body, notified body thing, it tends to be for a small minority for customers, particularly for EMC.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, can UK approved bodies provide services for CE marking as well as UKCA marking?
As a UK approved body, no, apart from Northern Ireland, wearing the hat of a UK approved body. But organisation like Element, for example, we're a UK approved body in the UK, but we're also an EU notified body through other Element offices. So we could test in the UK. We could provide you with a certificate that was good for UKCA and for CE. It wouldn't be a problem for us to do that, but it wouldn't be a UK entity can't issue directly the EU notified body certificate. That would come from one of our sister organisations. But it's a seamless process. We do it out the same place. But so strictly, no, a UK approved body can only issue a UK approved body certificate, but a test and certification body like Element will be a UK approved body and a notified body in its various international forms, and therefore can provide the one-stop service.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, if a manufacturer tests something now to CE standards, can they add UKCA as well?
Yes, the standards won't change. UK designated standards are at the moment equivalent largely to harmonized standards for most sets of regulations and directives. So if you've tested to an EN standard or an ETSI standard to CE marking regulations, then technically you should be able to meet the requirements for UKCA, subject to the marking, importer details, and the UK declaration of conformity. So administrative changes only. If we remember back to the slide with the mirror, technically it's an exact reflection. It's just the administration that you need to think about.
Great, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, for products which will be shipped into Europe, will an EU body be required to certify the equipment in addition to the UK body for the UKCA? Are companies able to self-certify for UKCA?
Yes, you can self-certify. If you're self-certified under CE marking, you can self-certify for UKCA. It's the same parameters apply. So if you're self-certifying for CE, you can self-certify for UKCA, and you can continue to do that. There's no restriction as a UK company shipping your products to the EU. It's just that your product is being imported into the EU market rather than being part of the market. So you will need to meet the EU's importer or authorized representative requirements, and they are different to the UK. The UK requirements are what we would have got used to historically, where you don't need to identify a responsible person within the UK, within the GB market. In the EU, because they've got a new set of market surveillance regulations, you have to identify either that you're the manufacturer, an authorized representative, an importer, or a distributor actually within the EU market. So it's slightly different EU rules which have changed, which now if you're a British manufacturer, you will need to follow. But technically, same standards.
Thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, does imported RF equipment which is CE marked have to be additionally certified in the UK to apply the UKCA mark?
Once UKCA becomes mandatory, then yes. CE will not be valid in the UK market after the 1st of January 2028. And after the 1st of January 2025, it will only be valid if it was certified prior to that date.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is regards to, is the easement only for the marking on the product, or can products remain to be sold in the UK with only the CE declaration and CE marking on the 1st of January 2023? Or is the UKCA declaration necessary with the CE marking?
Right. No. 1st of January 2023, you can continue to use your CE marking at the moment with an EU declaration of conformity. The two go together. So CE marking, EU declaration of conformity. You can continue to do that until the end of 2024, and then from the 1st of January 2025, you have to UKCA mark your product. And you have to have a UK declaration of conformity at that point. And then the easement rules then come in as to what you can use as evidence for that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is it true from the 31st of December 2027 that both packaging and product must be labelled with UKCA?
Depends on the directive or regulation where it specifically requires the packaging to be marked. Some do and some don't. A lot of people do mark the packaging anyway because it saves you having to open the box to find out whether the product is marked inside. So it will depend on your directive and regulation. It does vary. Some directives and regulations do require you to mark the product and the outer packaging, but not all regulations are the same.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, would you be able to explain a little bit more about importer details and when it's needed?
UKCA regulations require you to identify the importer. If you're not manufacturing in the GB market, there and somebody's importing that product into the country who isn't the manufacturer, then their details need to be on the product and in the documentation, so that the enforcement agencies in the GB market know who to go to in the event of there being a problem. So it's if you're the manufacturer and you don't have any representation in the UK, someone's buying that product off you and importing it into the country, they are taking responsibility for UKCA marking at that stage, and their details then need to go in on the product in addition to that of the manufacturer. If the manufacturer has their own representatives in the UK, then that's fine. Or they take responsibility, and you don't need to mark the importer details on, because it's the manufacturers retaining that responsibility all through a local office. That's different to the EU. But in the UK, that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, company currently uses a sticky label on their products to display the CE mark. Will this still be allowed for UKCA marking?
Until the end of the easement period, so until the end of 2027, yes. So yes, they will. So that's moved now back another 2 years. So yes, they can continue to use the temporary label until the end of 2027.
Okay, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, for a radio product that is suitable for both EU and UK, do they need to have importer details and the red country table for both EU and UK with the product?
Well, there wouldn't be a country table for UKCA because there's only one country. It's only the UK. So there is no table for that. So, but for the CE marking, whatever table you would put for CE marking. So whatever you did for red is associated with your CE mark, and you continue to do that. For UKCA, there is no table because it's only a single market, unless there's some weird restriction on there. So then you may need to flag it up, but it is only one country, so you would flag it up in the instructions with some sort of alert symbol, I would imagine. But whereas in the EU, there's obviously there's 27, 28 plus markets with varying requirements, and that's why you need to use the table with the various countries identified on it. But that's not going to apply for the UK.
Okay, great. Thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, if a manufacturer is based in NA and they need to sell to EU and the GB market, if self-declaring, do they only need to apply the CE mark?
Until the end of 2024, yes. After 2024, they should really apply the UKCA marking. However, there is a relaxation for Northern Ireland manufacturers, which says if you're a Northern Ireland manufacturer, you can just use the CE mark and ship it into the UK market. However, so that's a legalistic interpretation. Practically, though, your product's going to look very strange after 2025 as the only one without a UKCA mark on it. So I think practically, you would probably be better applying UKCA onto the product as well. If you've already meet CE marking requirements, you're going to it's an administrative process, so why wouldn't you? But if you don't apply the UKCA mark, it's going to look very, very odd because every other product made in GB or in the EU is going to carry a UKCA mark. So you may find difficulty in actually selling the product at that stage.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, someone has stated if they wish to design and make a new radio for sale in GB only, even though it uses frequencies that apply in NI or EU, can they simply do UKCA with a UK approved notified body?
Yes. Yeah, because the UKCA is only covering you for GB, so therefore it has no relevance in Northern Ireland. The UKCA mark is not applicable in Northern Ireland. It's not applicable in the EU, so therefore you can get away with it.
Great, thank you, Simon. The next question that I have is, if marking is currently affixed on an approved ATEX or IECEX label, will this continue to be sufficient, or will permanent stamping of products be the only acceptable marking method?
Go on, read that one again, because that's a...
No worries. The person has stated, if marking is currently affixed on an approved ATEX or IECEX label, will this continue to be sufficient, or will permanent stamping of the product be the only acceptable marking method?
If it's UKCA marking, then it follows the rules. It needs to be permanent after the 1st of January 2028. It can be on a sticky label up to that point. If it is ATEX standard or AEC standard marking, then that's not covered by this easement at all. They would be requirements from the certification body and from the standard, in which case they'd need to be permanently marked on the product. I suppose the only exception would be if you were UKCA marking using a UK approved body, you could possibly say, well, okay, I'll put the certification details for the UKCA mark on my temporary label or in my documentation. There would be some logic to that. So if that's what the question means, yes, I suspect that would be acceptable. But again, I would talk to a UK approved body and get their agreement with that.
Thank you, Simon. The next question I'm coming on to now will be the final question, as we're running out of time. So someone has asked, if they're selling into the UK market, is it okay to just mark their products as CE?
If they're just selling into the
If they're
UK,
not selling into UK, yeah, is it okay just to mark as CE?
If they're not selling into the GB market, they don't need, they can just use CE indefinitely. Northern Ireland is in the CE regime, so if you're going to sell it into Northern Ireland, then you would need, the CE mark would need to apply for that. But no, CE won't apply in the GB market after the 1st of January 2025.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for answering that, Simon. And also, thank you all for taking the time to join our webinar today. I had a terrific time on the webinar and I hope you all did too. If we did not get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us directly. We had a lot of great interaction and not enough time to answer all of the questions.